Okay, so today we're talking about light and shadow, and so we're going to go over a few keywords here, and one of them is value. So a lot of people will call this shading, but it's actually this term that's called value, and value is the lightness or darkness of an object or color. And so using that transition of values, fading from dark to light, or from one color to the next, or from all of those, that gradation, but in terms of just darks and lights, we call this value. So when we talk about color though, thinking about like pink, for example, is a tint of red, and because we make red lighter to make pink, and you make blue darker, and you make navy, for example, and so that would be a shade. So anyway, where we see this transition of values, we see these in a couple of pieces here. These are some cubist pieces. And so we can see this really nice, smooth transition from dark to light, or from, like I said, one color to another color. That also is kind of in that same category of gradations, but that gradation of values is really important to be able to achieve in works of art. Now, we also have contrast. So contrast is key when we talk about light and shadow, because, well, light is, I don't use the word light to describe light, but at the same time, it's our highlights, it's all of that, and shadow is our darker darks. So it's kind of this contrast. I mean, contrast can be a lot of different things, but in terms of value, that would be light and shadow. And so contrast, it's defined as the juxtaposition of differences in order to intensify the properties of each. So, as I mentioned, even though we're talking about light today, that doesn't mean that contrast is limited to that. Contrast can be between colors, texture, saturation, style, and more. So for example, this piece right here has contrast. So we have lots of darks, but we also have some highlights. This piece as well by Yayoi Kusama also has contrast, as well as this piece here by Franz Klein. So contrast is something that can be used in a variety of ways, but today we're focusing in on contrast in terms of light and shadow. So we can't bring that up without addressing this concept in art called chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro is the use of strong contrast between light and dark. So usually bold contrasts that affect a whole composition. And so the thing that's really cool about chiaroscuro is it creates a lot of drama in a piece. It makes it really dramatic. Think about if you were to go to a play and you're looking at the stage and there's a spotlight on one character and the rest of the lighting is all dark. That's an example of chiaroscuro. And so we see that in a lot of different works throughout art history. Here's an example of one. So a couple more here. And so what these artists are doing is they're really emphasizing the darkest darks and the lightest lights. And so it's kind of, a lot of these pieces are a little bit heavy on the darker side, and then there's smaller amounts of highlights. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it is this really dramatic emphasis on lights and darks. So that's what we're going to focus on today for our lesson here. And the way we're going to do that, to emphasize the highlights and shadows, looking at that value scale, going from light to dark and making sure that you have a nice variety of values, instead of using all of them, we're going to really focus on basically the darks, the darkest darks, so here 7, 8, 9, and then the lightest lights, so white plus 2 and 3 here that we have. And that will really help as we go about adding more of an emphasis on light and shadow in our works of art, whether that's a painting or a drawing, anything really. And so we're just going to focus on that. So I'm going to do a demo here in a second to show you what that looks like, but I want to just kind of highlight these little points here. And one thing that really helps is to have a good light source. If you're looking at something and you don't have great lighting, it's going to make it really challenging to draw. So I recommend grabbing a few objects and grab a desk lamp or some kind of lamp that can really give you kind of, like I said, that like the stage lighting I mentioned earlier, but that nice focused light, not 4 lights from a lamp, from an overhead light, from the window light, all of that makes it kind of confusing. There's not one direct light, and having one direct light with not so much other light going on will really help. So these are some interesting photos I just wanted to point out here to show kind of this dramatic lighting and how this will be really effective when creating these. So you can use some of these photos, feel free to do that for a photo reference, but I really recommend drawing from life if you can. If you're not able to though, a photo reference will absolutely do. Just look for one that says high contrast. So let's start with a pencil and a piece of paper. Eventually you can color it using oil pastels, but let's start with just a sketch. So you can decide how you want the shape of the head to be, if you want it to be more oval or if you would prefer it to be round. It's really up to you. I'm going to do mine with a circle, and then I'm going to create these large eye shapes that are similar to a regular eye shape, but maybe a little bit big for the face. Then let's add a couple lines and shapes in the face, similar to how Paul Klee created his portraits, where there's several different shapes inside the head shape. Then I'll draw the circles inside the eyes along with the other facial features. Now these facial features can be a little bit funky. You can also add other lines in the face as well. What's great about this project is we don't have to worry about the facial features being in perfect proportion, so it's okay if they're a little bit big or even small. It sort of just goes with the general style of this piece. Now, as you probably noticed at the beginning, Paul Klee used a lot of muted colors, meaning they're not very bright and vivid. So you can look at your oil pastels or crayons, colored pencils, whatever you have, and think about using colors that are a little bit more dull. So instead of using your bright yellow and bright red, look at your browns and your tans and your kind of dusty grayed out purples. Those will be great options to use to color this to make it so that it looks really inspired by artist Paul Klee.